Hello everyone, and welcome back to another CodingBytes Java REPL speedrun with me, Vince. Today, we're going to be going through some challenges which introduce us to methods or functions in Java. So methods and functions are an extremely important concept from coding, and it's extremely essential that you understand them in order to code more complex programs. So let's dive right in. So first of all, we need to ask ourselves, what is a function? And so a function is like a machine. You give it inputs, and it will give you outputs. And that's it. Like this is the most basic model of a function. So it's like if we have a function called add, and we give it the inputs as 2 and 3, it might return an output of 5. And so yeah, not all functions necessarily have inputs and not all functions necessarily have outputs, but we'll get to that when we get to that. We use functions in coding when we have like similar things we have to do repeatedly throughout our code, and it helps us simplify our code so we know what's going on, and it can help us code much faster and better programs. So let's get to the challenges. So first, our challenge is to write a method header on line 2 with the following specs. So a method header is how we define a function, and it defines what inputs a function receives and what outputs it gives out. So in this case, we want to output an integer from the function, call it practice1, and we need no inputs. So it wants us to just write the header. So what does a function header look like in Java? And it looks something like this. First, we put the output, in this case our int. Next, we put the function name, practice1. And finally, we would put the inputs in these brackets, except currently we have no inputs. So int practice1, this is a perfectly valid function, and if we run this code, actually, I'm not sure if it would return anything. There's no main method, but this code should work. So if we submit this code and it runs the tests, as you can see, it works perfectly. So that's how you define a function. So we'll go through some different types of functions, like how you can define them through the next few challenges. So next, we want to write a method header, another function, that returns a Boolean, so it outputs a Boolean. Its name is beTrue, and it doesn't have any parameters. So again, first we put the type or types it outputs, so in this case a Boolean. And next we put the name, beTrue. And finally, we put any inputs, but in this case there are still none. So if we submit this code, it should work fine. Yeah, and there we go. So that works fine. So next, we want to write a method header so it outputs a string. It's named makeCapital, and this time we actually have a parameter for it, and it's a string named name. So first we want to we want to specify what it outputs. In this case, it's a string, and then we want to put its name, makeCapital. And finally, in these brackets, this time we have some information we want the function to receive. And so to define a variable a function receives, it's like defining a normal variable. You put the type first, in this case string, and then you put its variable name, which in this case should be name. And so if we run this code now, as you can see, it's well, that's weird, but what should be happening is it takes our method, gives it input as test, and it returns the name. So if we run this code, ignoring the error, which is not our fault. Oh, never mind. So looks like we need to make this method static, which is interesting, but I'll tell you what this means in a second. just as we get this code working. Okay, so this works fine. Okay, so what static means um, is that every time we we can access this method from the class directly. And don't worry about this keyword too much right now. We'll talk about it a bit more when we get into classes. But if you're getting an error, like if we remove the static again, I'll show you the error. Lay it here. If non-static method cannot be referenced in a static context, try putting the keyword static in front of the method. Yeah, and so that should work fine. So sorry about that error, but yeah, should be working fine now. And as you can see, it works correctly. So finally, we want to write a method header that returns an integer. Its name is add2, and its inputs are an integer called x and an integer called y. So remember, first the output type. Actually, first we want to put static, because it's gonna give another error again if we don't put static. So maybe I'll talk a bit more about static. So static int add2, and then we need an integer called x and an integer called y. So to define two separate inputs, you want to put the comma between the inputs. So yeah, as I was saying earlier, what static means is that anytime you reference the class, you can call this function. That's it's like even if it's not an object instantiation of the class, you can still call the function, is what I believe it means. If that sounds a bit complex, don't worry. It's not super important, and we'll go deeper into classes later. So if we submit this code, it should now work. And it does, just like that. So that's all for this REPL speedrun. I hope you learned a new thing about methods. And in our next speedrun, we're going to be going a little bit deeper into actually creating your own method from start to finish. And that will teach you a lot more. If you like this video, leave a like. And if you didn't like it, or if you have any suggestions, leave a comment. And make sure to subscribe for more awesome coding content. See you then.